I'm Tom McMillan. Join me as I interview professional sports people on their journeys making it pro. I'm on a mission to explore the mental strength and dedication required to make it in professional sport. If you like what I'm doing, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Hope you enjoy the episode. Hi, Gordon. Welcome to Making It Pro. How are you doing?
Very good, thanks. Always a pleasure to catch up with people, especially in a bit warmer climate than me.
Aye, definitely. Listen, it's starting to drop. We're expecting rain for the next 10 days for tomorrow, apparently.
I think we've gave you it then.
Aye, I tell you, we're no well versed for it, that's for sure. So, Gordon, what I'll do, I'm just going to crack straight into the first question, and then we'll go through, obviously, the different various stages of your career. So, the first thing is, what's your earliest football memory?
Probably going to watch Motherwell because of my father, first and foremost. And I thought it was important, when I look back to have that grounding. That I was actually talking to somebody the other day that my early memories were getting lifted over the turnstile, and the way the games sort of going just now, it could be very expensive, for families to take kids to the football. But if my dad wasn't going to the game, I just went to Fir Park and asked the first guy to give me a lift over the turnstile, and never did they say no. And you just see how the importance that gets people indoctrinated into going to the game. Because if say my dad didn't have an interest, and he was an avid football fan, and like my uncle and all the people around about me, even my sister and my mum, it was all run about football. And because I had a wee kind of application for it at an early age, and my mum, to sadly passed away a couple of months ago. She had an early picture of one of my first pictures of me being able to walk, and there's a ball at my feet, and that kind of stayed with me for the last 50 odd years. I've never been too far away from a ball, but that story about if my dad wasn't going, and some guy decided not to lift me over the turnstile for whatever reason, there was no reason not to, then you've lost a generation to the game. And that was at every level. People just, a Saturday, especially 3 o'clock, if your team was at home, you went to watch them. And it gave me an opportunity to support a provincial club rather than be dragged towards the old firm when you don't stay in Glasgow.
Yeah. I think that's a great point, actually. And obviously, we both know Paul McDonald, and I spoke to Paul last week. He spoke about the same, and actually, Tam Cowan, who they said the same, both at Fir Park. And one of the points Tam made was that when you look at the stadiums now, where there's acres in some stadiums, especially in Scottish football, where some of the stadiums aren't quite getting filled, what a great opportunity it would be, the point you have made, to encourage local boys to support the local team because they could be lifted in, but also to fill stadiums and give the players the support locally that they need. So I think that's a terrific point.
Well, in my tenure as academy director at Motherwell, I was very aware of that. And because we weren't awash with money, one of the reciprocal trade agreements we had with the council for the use of the facilities for our academy was to give tickets to the schools. Yeah. And we gave some like 400 or 500 tickets per week. And even if you just think about that, they bums are not going to be in the seats for a start. But just supposing they take their mate, or they just say to their dad, look, I've got 2 tickets for the game, there's a good chance you might buy a scarf at the shop, and you'll certainly, kids being kids, or want a juice or a pie or a bovril, as it was. So it's about getting that generation of kids to love live football. You talk about my first memory. What I can really remember, and this just takes you back to, I went to the Motherwell Tottenham Hotspur Texaco Cup game with my dad and my grandpa. And I remember being like a sardine. But I always remember the liniment as well, because we were in an enclosure right next to the tunnel. And that's a scent that you'll not forget. And it might be strange to kids in this day and age. In fact, I was doing it was a coaching session I was doing a couple of weeks ago. And I'd said to the winger, joking, I says, listen, you need to be as wide as you can. Yeah. Get sawdust on your boots. Yeah. That was a terminology that a coach would tell you when I was playing as a young kid, Obviously, sawdust been replaced with white lining, and white lining has been replaced with AstroTurf. But it's those things that stay with you for being a young kid and being involved in football. And I'm just so grateful that I've been able to be in it for as long.
And what about your own, sort of playing experience? What was the first sort of memory you get involved with actually playing the game, Gordon?
Well, again, it was being a schoolboy form at Motherwell, and being at, you're 13 years of age, and it just shows you how things have changed. And I do think most of it's for the better, but and a club at the time, could only sign about 12 or 15 S forms, and now we're saying that you can sign 250 S forms. So if you do the maths, and the 40 clubs in Scotland are 42, maybe not all of an academies, but they're allowed to sign 250. It dilutes the product slightly, but at the same time, it gives people the opportunity to try and make it in the game. And diversifying slightly. I was doing, because I'm sitting maybe a bit of time in my hands just now. I was looking at going back to my days at the academy director at Motherwell, because it is close to my heart, and mainly because when I came back from Latvia, and I'm jumping here, I came across a lot of people that were still playing the game that I never gave contracts to at the club, and that gave me a lot of satisfaction knowing that if they weren't good enough to make it with Motherwell on a first team contract, they were good enough to stay in the game. And these players have stayed in the game for the guts of 10 years. And they've realised, like I had to do, I played most of my career part-time. And I had a job, and I played, I trained 2-3 nights a week, and I played on a Saturday. And I amassed over 500 games doing that. And it gave me a good lifestyle, because if I combined my main job with my football, I was better off than a lot of people that were playing at the lower levels just with that wage. And I think that's always been the bone of contention in Scotland. We've been a wee bit out of sync with amateur, junior and senior football, because probably the top ranking amateur teams were better than the mid to lower junior teams, and certainly the best junior teams, and I was lucky enough to play with a few good ones, they were better than the division above. So much so, I remember, when John Clark signed me for Shotts, and his mate Tommy Gemmell was the manager at Albion Rovers. When we used to meet for a pre-match meal at Newhouse Hotel, anybody that wasn't in the starting, or wasn't in the 13, used to go and play the Albion Rovers first team. And that was the disparity of the game. And I'm a big fan of how the pyramid system has changed the demographics of football, especially working at Cove Rangers. When I see a club coming out the Highland League and they're now holding their own the Championship within 3 years. So that itself shows there's an ability, if you want it, to stay in the game. And a presentation that I tend to do to young players is ask them a question: who's the most important person at a football club? And they really haven't got an answer other than maybe the best player or the manager. But the line I'm trying to get down with these kids is, if you don't make it as a first team player, there's an opportunity to play part-time. There's an opportunity maybe to have a scholarship, not just in America, but in other countries. My son had 4 years in South Carolina and became an All-American. There's an opportunity to be a physio, to be a club doctor, to be an analyst, to be a coach, like I ended up doing. But the most important person at the club at any given time can change. We might have snow tonight, we've got a game tomorrow, and the groundsman becomes the most important man at the club. We might be the 11th hour in the transfer window, and the secretary's the most important person at the club, because he or she has got to get that signing in. It might be on the football field that it's one each and we've got a penalty kick in the last minute. So our penalty taker is the most important person. Or if you reverse that, we might be one each and our goalkeeper's facing a penalty. So all of these things, might even just be the commercial manager trying to get funds in at the pre-season to give the manager a war chest. So it's that shift in dynamics and getting kids to understand that. I know it's devastating, because I've been in that position as a young player, being rejected. And as an academy director and as a first team manager, I always took the responsibility to give the bad news to the player myself. I didn't backheel that to anybody else, Tom. I felt it was, if you come in the front door, you get the front door.
No, that's brilliant. I mean, you know, when you take, because one of the questions actually that I was about to ask you, but, you know, it'll be good to kind of put it back to you is at that stage when you'd gone into Motherwell as an S form, you know, was there anybody there that particularly influenced you? But also you can see how important that time was for you becoming a coach, because, you know, you're trying to impress upon the kids who's the most influential person in a certain situation. And it's good for kids to have their mind broadened rather than just thinking the best player or the manager. So, you know, when you were coming through as an S form, was there anybody either at the club or maybe even a family member, was there anybody particularly influenced you and as your journey took sort of shape, Gordon?
But just always my family, because they were they're your biggest supporter.
Yeah.
And I see at the academy level, we're asking kids or clubs are asking kids to come in 4 nights a week and a day at the weekend. And I always worried what that did to their siblings or other family members, because they're putting all their eggs into the basket that this player is going to, you know, end up playing with Scotland and be a multi-millionaire, when all the academies, you're running it for 5%. So your exit strategy is far more important. And I ended up leaving Motherwell at the time because I felt there was a local club close to me, and it was an Erdale Community Club, who went on to play. And wee Paul played with them as well. He's a lot older than me, but he'll like me for that.
And me.
I'm kidding on. We used to, I scored the first ever goal in their inception, but it was a draw to the community.
Yeah.
And we travelled all over Europe, and we were like, you know,
Yeah.
globetrotters. We were like trendsetters. We were going to England, we were going to abroad when the other teams weren't doing it. And this was people that sold the dream to me, because they, you know, they offered this. And back in the day, I had some wonderful coaches at Motherwell, Billy Campbell, you know, who stays close to me just now. And, you know, my English teacher was Wilson Humphreys, who scored in, you know, the Scottish Cup famous win 1952 for Motherwell, and he then became my reserve team manager when I played games there as well. So I always had that synergy and that local connection. But the people that, you know, my dad was always big on making sure my education was up to scratch, to give me something to fall back on. And hand in heart, I don't think I'd have had the 20 years coaching if I didn't have my education behind me. Because while I'd have loved to have gone to the very top level, my peer at the time was Gary McAllister, who was absolutely unplayable. And he was keeping me out of the Motherwell team. So for me to finish my education, go to further education, when I stopped playing, I didn't want to be a coach, but I then had communicational skills, I had organisational skills that I could then transfer. And in the inception of the academies, it was so important that the boys' club mentality was left behind for this structure that was far more professional and far more disciplined for young kids to you know, come through the pathway.
Yeah. And when you started on that journey into coaching, Gordon, did you at that time even see a huge difference from how it had been when you'd gone through it as a player yourself?
100%, because as I say, I'd no intention of being a coach. You know, I tell a story when I was working with Billy Davis at Motherwell. We were young kids. You know, at that time, if you're selected, you could go on trial with teams, and you know, the stories of them putting the S forms in drawers. There just wasn't the structure. It was, or you know, the traceability or accountability. But we, as young kids, had been in at Rangers on a couple of training sessions. Excuse me. And he'd logged training sessions for the age of 13.
Yeah.
And he pulled out names and what we did on a night, you know, in 1979.
Yeah.
And this was incredible. So when I'm now, you know, 30 years later, he's under 17 coach at Motherwell. I'm starting out in my career, and he's pulling out this old battered briefcase, and he's showing me names and session plans. He had that focus, and he was I thought he was a great player, Billy Davis, but he went into management very early.
Yeah.
So my journey was slightly different. I was playing part-time, and I was 34, and the manager got the sack. I was playing at Cambuslang Rangers at the time.
Yeah.
And we were playing to crowds of 1,500, 2,000. We were well paid. We were very successful. And Peter Miller, who was the manager, had signed me, bought me twice. A great Motherwell stalwart. I remember cleaning his boots, at Motherwell. But when he got the sack, I was into my last year, and I was probably the oldest player and maybe the most, I was the most expensive player in terms of I was earning the most money. So the natural thing was to make you the player coach.
Yeah.
And I just didn't get the feel for it. I used to go and have a cup of tea with my dad on a Friday night, and I'd have a team with me in it, a team with me not in it, and I didn't know what to do. And after a couple of weeks, he says to me, "You either play or you coach." He says, because what you're doing, he says, you're not kicking a ball. He says, but you're trying to do everybody else's job.
Yeah.
So I took that advice and I thought, I'm going to put this in the back burner. I had an assistant and I said, you become the manager. I'll stay as the player coach to the end of the season. And all I really was looking for was an exit strategy. I wasn't going to renew my contract. I was touching 35. But just coincidentally, Peter gets a call to get into Motherwell as an ex-player, and the academies were only just starting up really then, 1999, 2000. And clubs like Motherwell had maybe 3 teams. They'd done their 13s, 15s and 17s. Maybe even only, 13s and 15s.
Yeah.
The 17s would be your old apprentices, that would come in. And, he'd say to me, look, come in, you love this. And I says, look, I don't know, I'm not so sure of this. And he says, no, come in. He says, it's totally different. We're training on an AstroTurf pitch. I want you to just work on the skill set of the players, and being a kind of technical player as I was or being noted for. I really enjoyed working with the kids on their technique and their ability and the ball mastery. And as the season came to an end, he says, look, it might be an opportunity to come in next season. He says, I think they're adding another team here. You come in as my assistant. You work on the training ground on the technical side as you're doing. And I went and played because I gained good connection, and you know the background. Go and play the one season with DL High School, and you won the Amateur Cup. And I thoroughly enjoyed it because I was 36. I wasn't getting paid.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it because I was going to a different environment. I was playing with good players that had either been senior or junior like myself. They were well organised and good facilities. And at the same time, I was coaching 2 nights a week at Motherwell. And from there, I started to get a feel for it and an enjoyment for it. And then I started to take my badges. And really, I remember saying to Peter, I'm going to take these early stages and that'll be me, because you needed it for the criteria at the time.
Yeah.
But as I was doing that, I was meeting people, and then it became a wee bit obsessive, mostly through enjoyment. I was working as a sales manager, director. I had a good job. But the opportunity that people backed me and thought I had a wee bit of ability, then I kind of made my way through the teams, not necessarily to get to the first team, but just as incrementally how the academy developed. And Chris McCart, who was the academy director, had got the opportunity to go to Celtic, sadly because of the death of Tommy Burns. And he recommended me to speak to the owner, who was John Boyle at the time at Motherwell, and the board, and they offered me his job. And that was a big decision to come and say to my wife, I'm going to get into, this level, and I'm going to leave this behind. But I felt comfortable that I would be successful, and just with a bit of luck, I did not too bad.
How many years had you been in coaching at that particular time when that first sort of, bigger opportunity came along, Gordon?
Well, again, I kind of went through it. I went in 2001, and I worked, as the assistant to Peter. We only had 13s and 15s, and we ran between the 2 age groups, and we passed them on because it was dual banded. And then, as I say, Billy came in as the manager, and he started to involve me with scouting roles, and so I was learning everything about the job. I was working, I could shadow the first team. Then I would take, teams on my own. So I'd be the 15s manager, and then I'd be the 17s manager. And then when the academy director role opened up in their days, you could still be the academy director and you were responsible for under 19s, which there was no reserve team. So that was the next team below the first team. So you worked hand in hand with them, and I worked with just unbelievable coaches like Eric Black and Mark McGee and I say, Chris McCart was there, Terry Butcher, Maurice Malpass, and then, you know, I'd go and then become first team coach with Craig Brown, Archie Knox. I'd work with Stuart McCalls and Kenny Blacks, and it became it was a joy to go to work. It just because I hadn't really got to the top level as a player. I was enjoying it through my coaching.
Yeah.
That's
an important point, Gordon. Obviously, for any young player currently in an academy watching this, that you had the flavour obviously coming through, which is like the modern day scholarship now, but getting an S form as we knew, in our sort of age category, and then coming to a point of realisation where maybe getting to play at the highest level wasn't going to be quite as readily available. But, even at that, it wasn't a sort of instant route for you to just fall into coaching. But the love grew for it. And as the love grew for it, so did the sort of, the position that you gained as a coach. And I think that can be sometimes difficult for any young players watching, a sort of video like this. So often they're being asked to decide, even kids that's not in football, you do your meetings with your teachers and they're saying sort of, well, what do you want to do? At 16, you have to decide the rest of your life.
Yes.
And it shows for yourself how a professional role within the game obviously developed and grew, and your love for that role grew with it. It wasn't something that you decided, right, okay, let's dive into coaching. It was a natural sort of organic growth. And I would imagine your sort of love and displaying that for the role that you were undertaking is what allowed you to grow through those different sort of levels within Motherwell itself at the beginning.
Well, I think a big thing I maybe touched on, just slightly earlier on. The kids make a big commitment, and we can take kids in at 9 and 10. I'm saying because I'm not currently doing that at this particular juncture, but the clubs are taking on players at a very young age, and they're making these families have got to make a commitment. And then when I mentioned about the success and it's not a failure rate, it's an experience rate. So your experience of being at a club, and one of the mantras I used to say to young players and families, enjoy every training session and enjoy the games, because I wish I was still playing, and you don't know how long you're going to be in that position. So there's no point in you getting all hung up about it, and there's competition obviously, but you've got to make sure your family life's stable, your education is the best it can be. We all get different academic capabilities, the way you've got different football capabilities, but there's an opportunity to combine both. And I know that Holland went through a spell where the guys that weren't deemed the best players, they tried to make them goalkeepers to fit the Dutch philosophy of the total football. And then I looked at an organisation called Pitch to Podium, where we're looking at athletes that are in our academy, and I'm having to say, look, in this particular juncture, and I can only take so many players forward, and I try and evidence why I can't take you forward, and that's got to be done in a holistic manner, and it's got to be evidenced by the pillars of your philosophy of the club, not just me. And you should be able to stand over that. It's not because I've got a grievance with you as a family, or because I've got a dislike to your boy as a player. It's because I can produce evidence that at this particular time and the amount of spaces that are there, he needs to look at that other club, that other career, combination of both. And this Pitch to Podium that I discovered, I looked at our biomechanics of some of our players that weren't getting offered contracts, and I also used to make these decisions early in the year. I didn't want them hanging on to the last minute and me suddenly saying, oh, by the way, thanks for coming, all the best.
So it's a shock then.
It's a terrible, it's you've got to keep constant dialogue and let people know about progression, regression, ways that they might be going through puberty, they might be going through some emotional problems, they might be going through some difficulties in their schooling, and I had so many stories that I could tell. And when I did write the book in lockdown, I mentioned one or two really strong cases that opened my eyes. And sometimes, you know, I was with Paul last week. We're on an SFA licence course, and we spent a good bit of time talking about the relative age effect. And that's about, you know, kids been born in the first quarter of the year as opposed to kids been born in the last quarter of the year.
Yeah.
And that maybe, you know, it went maybe against me a wee bit because I wasn't the biggest, but, you know, I had quite a wee bit of technical ability. But this relative age effect explains how we don't cater enough for these kids in quarter 3 and quarter 4. And a lot of it comes down to finance. Because in an ideal world, you obviously want to pick your recruitment is based on your best players, your strongest players, your psychologically more developed players, the ones that can understand tactical information. But at the same time, you've got these late bloomers, which used to be called, against early developers. And countries like Belgium and Ireland used to make a case for them and go with 2 age groups in the 1 year. Now, if you've got the finance, it's like boxing. You wouldn't put a heavyweight in with a flyweight. But sometimes we stick in somebody that's a bit more physically mature than another player, and that can have a detrimental effect on him. And then when he starts to physically develop, he's lost out so much game time, and he's also been a bit disillusioned with the game that this guy who's been a peak developer is suddenly regressing a wee bit, and we've not got the balance of who succeeds and who's still got a wee bit catch up to do.
That's a fantastic point. There's a really good book called Outliers, and part of it, I don't know if you've seen it. It focuses on the ice hockey in countries like Canada, and that's what they were saying, that once you went past, they worked at the calendar year, obviously 1st of January to end of December, and when they went, you know, literally beyond April, there wasn't anybody making it. And as you say, in football, you could have somebody who is going under the same age category, playing under 15s, 17s or 16s or whatever. And in actual fact, the physicality that differs is really because there's 10 months of difference with them. You know, that some of them can be days from being in the wrong age category, which is unfortunate. And I think
the top clubs can take this, you know, they can take measurements of, you know, things like your body girth, your thigh, your calf. We used to look at bone density, and a lot of it comes down to finances, and a lot of it comes down to facilities. Whereas it's, you know, it's the chicken and the egg. People say, what would you know, for your recruitment, are you looking at the best player, or are you looking for somebody that's got the most development in them? In an ideal world, you want both. And it's how you know, that this is where club philosophy is massive, and you can see why clubs with the resources will keep the investment in the development squads or the colt teams. And I saw this at a big level when I was at Sheffield United. When I left Motherwell, when I went to Sheffield United, there was 5 guys doing the job I did at Motherwell, and that was down to resources and finances and a bigger structure and you know, the long-term player development picture.
And so obviously, when you were in Motherwell and you took on that more senior role, so what was did you get the opportunity, Gordon, to then sort of put your stamp on it?
I did, but I think it's important that you've got this. It should never really be down to just what I think. It should be about what is the club objective, what is the culture. What is the vision and the philosophy? And the vision of the club, when I was at Motherwell, like most clubs in Scotland, is to get players into the first team. Now, you maybe have clubs like Barcelona, or not even as far, you know, maybe Swansea, who have got or Brentford, who have got a specific model, and their manager will only be selected to fit their philosophy. But hand in heart, a club like Motherwell or a Kilmarnock or a St Mirren or whatever, that can change from appointment to appointment. So I felt my emphasis had to be on making the players as rounded as possible to accommodate whoever was the incumbent manager. Unless you're a club who can say from root to fruit, you're going to play a certain way, you're going to recruit a certain way, and your philosophy is driven and it'll never change. There's not a lot of clubs I don't think can afford to have that that outlook.
Aye. It's a huge point. I remember actually, and obviously, it was, you and Paul worked together, but Paul Hartley. I went to see Dundee were playing Manchester City, and I remember actually when Manchester City arrived, it was when Pellegrini was the manager. They had 2 bus loads, one bus with the players and one with the backroom staff.
Yeah.
And they couldn't fit all the staff at Dundee in the players' lounge, so they didn't know where to put them. I mean, there was tens of them. I was going to say hundreds, but there was there was 4 for this and 5 for that. And I remember they were having to take turns again in the players' lounge to something. They just couldn't physically fit them all in, and that shows the vast difference, as you say, in finances
and resources.
Man City's one extreme and maybe Dundee the other, but certainly in Scottish football, that's what would have made your level of commitment to that role at Motherwell so important, because obviously, as you say, you're doing the job of 5 men.
Well, just a couple of months ago, I was telling somebody a story just the other day, but a couple of months ago, we were down at Hartlepool. We drew Blackburn Rovers in the Carabao Cup at Ewood Park. So I just remember when I was before I was setting the warm-up up, and I looked round at the dugout, and there was 49 places in the dugout. There was 9 rows of 5, and then there was 4 at the front. And I remember it just put it in my head that when I was watching Premier League games, you see the amount of staff that are there. Now, that itself should give young kids the confidence that there's roles out there.
Yeah.
So it's not the day when it was the manager and the assistant manager and probably a trainer, way back in the day. Now you're talking about sports scientists. You're talking about I remember Liverpool have got a throwing coach. You've got set piece coaches. You've got fitness coaches. You've got analysts. You've got and so many, because there's so many different structures that can accommodate that at that level. But also at the lower level, you're becoming more rounded, because there'll be part-time managers in Scotland that will have to edit their own clips. They'll not have the resource. So that's another reason why I looked at Motherwell, and I looked at Sheffield United, and I looked at trying to get kids on refereeing courses, or looking at seconding them to places that would give them physiotherapy input or video analysis input, just to give them a flavour that I'd love you to make it, and everyone that comes through the door, you want to make it. I've coached kids in Scotland, England, China, India, America, Latvia, Taiwan, and every kid wants to make it. And they can't, so we've got to try and prepare them. I think the worst thing you can do is cocoon them and blinker them and blinker their families. Yes, you want them to be as successful as you can, but you can't, paint a picture that everything is going to be rosy.
Because it's often far from it. And obviously, there's a degree your own career's reflected that, and how you've gone on to have a successful career in football, albeit it wasn't necessarily, playing as much, although you had a good playing career, as you'd said. And there were some success stories with individual players, and obviously collectively as a team at Motherwell. Gordon, is that right?
Again, I can't take all the credit. All I can ever be accountable for is I was in charge at the time, and it was my decision to hire the coaches and the recruitment staff, and we had a really profitable time for the club, which firstly making it in the first team and then being sold. Now, I know that, the ones that will get churned out are the Turnbulls, the Hasties, the Campbells, Scott, Caddens, McAleer, Murrays, McKinstry's. They were terrific kids, first and foremost, with good, solid families that understood. And I remember, putting a wee note when I did write the book, how grateful I was that at the end of the season, when the old firm would come in for all of these players that I've mentioned, they believed that I created a pathway for them to play with the first team. And as a result, when the teams came in to buy them as first team players, they were going as fully fledged footballers, as opposed to going as a promising 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old when you're in a big pond. So it's great credit to families that buy into your ethos and buy into your pathway, because there is a lot of peer pressure there among parents.
You see that success, that specific route you've mentioned, players like Andy Robertson, you know, who by the time he gets to Liverpool, he's still a young lad by all accounts, but he was an experienced footballer as well, because he'd done the work at Queen's Park, he had done the work at Hull, he'd done the work at Dundee United, and then by the time he ends up at Liverpool, he is, as you described, he's a fully fledged professional footballer. He's capable of handling the knocks, and especially in the position he plays in. So that's incredible. And so overall, how many years were you there fully at Motherwell, Gordon?
13.
Aye, that's fantastic.
And in that period, you know, I saw kids making their debut. I saw, you know, kids being sold to big clubs. You know, I remember coming in as just an academy coach, and James McFadden, you know, on the last day of the transfer window, was getting sold to Everton, and he's sitting with my son, and my son's only, you know, 7 or 8 at a time, and Faddy's playing football with him in the lounge while his paperwork's getting sorted. You know, and that goes on to one of Scotland's greatest ever, in my opinion, players. But then I see a kid like David Turnbull coming through the door and being shy, but we having the ability that I just thought that he was going to be a Scotland international, as I did with Stephen Saunders, you know, maybe 6 years before David. But they all, you know, you get to know their personality. But what I tried to do was I tried not to get too close, and I tried not to be too distant with people, because I always knew that they would leave the club. And you either leave the club after your trial, you leave it after a couple of months, you leave it after half a season, 3 seasons, 4 years. What I would, if I was going back in to the academy game, which it really is what I think my skill set is, as much as I'm, you know, a hands-on coach on the grass, I think clubs should reward players more. And it's almost like, again, I spent a bit of time in America, and I love the American, you know, the way of life about, you know, even if you go for a coffee, you get rewarded with a stamp, and, you know, everything's about loyalty. And I think players, when I was writing down the other week there, just doodling about the players that had come through the system and players that I'd met that were still playing in the game, and I worked out there was about 37 players that made their debut for Motherwell when I was in that particular time, which is an unbelievable amount. But also calculated that there was 82 players that were playing professional football. And that is another great testimony to them having the ability to pick themselves up after they've been knocked down and deciding to stay in the game. Now, when I went to Sheffield United, there was a stat through the EPPP that players after the age of 23, there was 35% of them not playing football at all. Which is an unbelievable statistic, given that they've come in at 17 and 18 as a potential first team starlet. But I think if clubs are rewarding, it's almost like saying you be a year at Motherwell. Do you know what? It's like the grading system at the judo. You start at a white belt, and then you're a yellow belt. And you know what? See if you get a contract with Motherwell, you're now a black belt. And it might be recognition by the way we do with Halls of Fame and stuff like that. But it's a great achievement to be 5 years in academy. It's a great achievement to be an apprentice. It's a great achievement to make your first team debut. And it's a great achievement, you know, to make first team appearances. And sometimes we forget all that, and we talk about legends that have been 10 years with a club and they get a testimonial. Do you know that there's legends there that spent 5 years coming through the academy system and decided to still stay in the game, and it's just how I've evolved as a person and as a coach over the years, and being in the countries that I've been and seen the things that I've seen in terms of, you know, from the coaching side of it, from the recruitment side of it, from the way clubs run. And I've been so fortunate that I've had so many roles in clubs that it gives me a great understanding about how it works as a football business.
I think as well, that you're describing, you can see the cultural difference in the game in England over the last 10 or 15 years, or since the inception of the Premier League, and now up to obviously one of the best that's probably ever lived in Guardiola. But you see, the influence and still revered that Sir Alex Ferguson had. So there's so many, Wenger and the people who have come in and changed the culture at certain clubs. And as you say, with the sort of backing of nutritionists and sports scientists and the clubs having the finances to support that. But so when you came to that point at Motherwell and the opportunity came to move on, what came next for you, Gordon?
I went, I had been that length of time. I'd been caretaker manager a few times, and on one particular occasion, there was people that thought I should, be appointed, but I wasn't ready at the time because for two reasons. Although I was first team coach under Craig and Archie, and I learned so much, being able to go to the field and be organised and have a structure, and be able to get your point across, players buy into that. And the players I worked with were outstanding characters. Even Motherwell's current manager, Stevie Hamill, Keith Lasley, the players that we worked with at the time, you had Suttons and Darren Randall, Stephen Craigan. They were terrific lads first, and then they were very good players. But I thought there was a lot of stuff I could do at the academy.
Yeah,
and that was where I thought I was going to get really could see a difference. Leave a legacy. I might have went on, and did particularly well, and we were successful and won something. But at the other side of it, we weren't awash with the resources at the time. I always thought it was a kind of sticking plaster over it, where my skill set was being honed as the academy director and taking the team underneath the first team to push them through. So I was in a perfect situation. But then when the time did come and Sheffield United offered me the role as international academy manager, I thought, I've got to get back and tell the family this. But my kids were at a good age where I wasn't sacrificing anything to do with their schooling or and the role was exciting, and it opened up the world to me. Really, literally opened up the world where I went with that club. I worked closely at Sheffield United with their teams all the way to the first team, and then I got seconded to India, China, Taiwan, Belgium, Hungary, Bulgaria, and I was working with clubs that had a different aspect, and all at the time my knowledge was growing, and that's why I keep thinking that the game's changing so much that you need to keep abreast of it. You can't do the things that you did a year ago, let alone 10 years ago. You've got to keep moving with it. You've got to keep improving yourself. You've got to keep studying. You've got to keep reading. You've got to keep, look at the World Cup. The guy I worked with at Dundee United, who's a UEFA observer, Mixu Patalainen, a wonderful guy and a wonderful coach. And because he's a UEFA observer that gets sent to the Champions League games and the major tournaments, he keeps me abreast with the changing trends, about how they're being tracked, the data. And I'm so grateful to that I can then use that for my, continuous professional development.
I think that's another great point you've made, which is very much the case. I know for the many players and coaches such as yourself that how willing other people, like obviously your relationship with Mixu Patalainen and sort of what that offers as far as exchanging information. A lot of people look for the outside and think, if you're at a club, a specific club, you're not really prepared to connect or work with other coaches in the game. But I see the opposite. I see a lot of good connections where, and you look at the course, like yourself and Paul were on last week, that further development is continuous. When you think back when we were young, the style of management that Ron Atkinson's this day, and the kind of shouting and bawling, and the manager, as you said right at the start of this interview, was like a sort of figurehead of the club. But there's so many influential people at clubs, and obviously when you went into an international role at Sheffield United, it shows you then that role, probably 20 years ago didn't even exist for a club like Sheffield United, as big a club as they are, so...
Not at all. And they were a massive club, and that was the role that I went into was the baby of a guy called John Stevenson, who'd been at Celtic round about the Tommy Burns era, and he was a learned man who again combined the football with the scholastic ability that he had, but he had a vision that Sheffield United shouldn't have been really in that ballpark at the time. No, he was away before the setups you've got just now, where you've got multiple club ownership. Where you've got the Watford model with the Spanish and the Italians, and you've got the City Group. John Stevens was way ahead of that. I was going into India and delivering a menu to clubs who were buying off Sheffield United, and the same in China. And they owned part of Central Coast Mariners and 100% Ferencváros. And there was so many opportunities for me. Again, I was developing all the time.
Yeah,
that was the most important thing for me.
And see, I know those roles as they changed and different things adapted, and you get different challenges thrown at you, Gordon. How did you feel yourself? Did you ever feel any sense of pressure, or that God, you talk about your own family and going in and letting them know? Did it any time did you look at it and think, right, God, here comes a right challenge now, and ensuring that you're up for it yourself? Did you ever feel that?
No, really, because I was living the dream.
Yeah.
And when I'm coaching footballers, and right up to 5-6 weeks ago, every morning I would remind players how lucky they are to be a professional footballer.
Yeah.
And I reminded myself how lucky I was to be either academy director, first team coach, assistant first team coach, whatever my role was. Yeah. Every day I loved doing that. And I'm sure a lot of players that have came in contact with me, if you ask my name, I used to say to them, what else would you rather be doing? And it was my throwaway line. What else would you rather be doing? I don't care if it's raining. I don't care if you've got beat at the weekend. What else would you rather be doing? And Craig Brown said to me many years ago, or he said in front of the players, he says, look, you're getting paid for us to keep you fit, healthy, off the streets, and a comfortable lifestyle. And sometimes you don't appreciate it. And I'm keen that players appreciate how much the game is and how many people would love to be doing their roles.
Well, you look at the sort of famous quote, certainly in Scotland, the wee Bertie Auld, obviously a pivotal player within the Lisbon Lions team that were, obviously the first British team to win the European Cup. And he said it's great, we get to train all week, and a Saturday we get the day off to play football, and that's, I think, I mean, I've said that to my own son numerous times. It is such a luxury. But at the same time, for somebody like yourself, handling the different egos and the different types of players, it's still a task.
But you've got to embrace that task, and you've got to, if you don't have the skill set, you need to then acquire the skill set, or it's not for you. But you mentioned about the challenges. Every place I went to, there was a challenge, because it tends to be the nature of the beast. At Motherwell, we had to grow the academy in terms of real infrastructure, fixtures and fittings, because the club at that time was known the best place financially. But their vision to invest in the youth paid dividends for them with the players that came through. And also, that was the thing. If I was trying to sign your son, I would tell you that he'd get a chance to play for our first team. And a lot of other clubs can't give you that.
Yeah.
So then you would go to Sheffield United, and the challenge was, leaving Motherwell and getting a flight to Dubai and then a flight to Calcutta, or then go from Calcutta to Shanghai to Taipei. This was a wee guy from Muirhouse in Motherwell. And I'm in America. I'm driving over the Golden Gate Bridge, and with t-shirts and the shorts on, going to training. And I'm saying that this is terrific. You need to one, be lucky enough to get the opportunities, but you shouldn't let them go when they're in your grasp.
And obviously, as you say, I mean, absolutely, is I think it's a blessed opportunity to go, but the luck side, I think you earn that yourself. And obviously you look at the World Cup at the minute and you can see, how England's set up to play USA. I think even listening to Gareth Southgate's interview on the day, he was going to play for a draw. And I think that was his plan. But that's credit to obviously the team that USA are. And when you were spending your time in America working, Gordon, and obviously you mentioned your son played there for 4 years and became, an All-American. How was, could you see the speed at which the game was developing there?
100%, especially on the girls or the women's side of things. But where in my period of time, 18 months that I worked over there, but more importantly, I was delivering coach education and clinics for maybe 6 years before that, and that's when the opportunity arose that gave me the chance to go and work out there.
Yeah,
I could see how the game was evolving, and I could see it in the urban situation where the old historical Ivy League baseball teams that were the focal point of the town or the small city, they were getting replaced with soccer clubs because the generations were taking on, it was football. The girls wanted to play football, the boys wanted to play football, but only up until now, there's no real pathway, because when they get to 17, 18, they all migrate to college.
Yeah.
But when they do go to college, again, the facilities that my son played in South Carolina were just fantastic, and the resources they had at their disposal. But now it's starting to change, where all over the USA and it's the size of Europe, as you well know, there's more and more structure getting invested in the leagues. And the pathway that these soccer clubs, they're like academies, have now got a men's team and a women's team, and now your regional leagues are now becoming national leagues. And the only, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, is it's still always a franchise situation where there's no promotion and relegation. But I can see that changing.
Yeah.
And
as the game expands and they've got the number of clubs to accommodate that, I think that's probably the biggest test in that sense. Interesting.
Once they can get the finances, other than the philanthropist that's investing in the club, who doesn't get relegated, and you then start generating your own income, then that'll change.
Interestingly, I read Alex Scott, the sports presenter now, and I read her book very recently, and it was really interesting that you've picked up in the women's game out in America, because to her, getting the opportunity to play what felt like the men's professional game was getting to America. So the women's game had actually come on more rapidly than the women's game in the UK. And then when she came back to Arsenal, she discussed the difference in how professional it had been in the US, and trying to bring some of that back to a club the size of Arsenal.
Well, I'd played with guys here, and their daughters had gone like Robbie's route, my son, out to the collegiate system in America, and they just had a wonderful time. They became better players, but they also enjoyed just an experience that they would never get here. And again, going back to what I thought was, part of my exit strategy at Motherwell and Sheffield United, was that there's other opportunities out there. It might be, that, Robbie was playing with Nick Barmby's son, and who'd come through the Tottenham academy, and in his team they were multinational team that had Swedish internationals, they had French internationals. They had his roommate was Barry Ferguson's boy, who I met down. He was playing with Harrogate against Hartlepool at the start of the season, and again, that's part of how this football thing works. The amount of people that I've been fortunate to work with, the amount of people that I could call a friend, the amount of experiences that I've had, it's just down to that ball. We get a saying, it's where the ball takes you. That happens on the pitch, but it also happens off the pitch.
Yeah. And so then when that sort of 18 months was up, and then you were coming back, what sort of brought about the next move for you, Gordon?
Well, just that chronologically, I was at Sheffield United, and I was doing this role, which I thoroughly enjoyed. But Mixu Patalainen and I had developed a friendship through the coaching courses, and also when I was at Motherwell, I had his boy in for evaluation. And I would have signed him, but he had a kind of chronic knee injury problem, and that stopped me signing him. But again, the testament to the type of character he was. He didn't go as an ex-pro saying, "What do you know about football?" You know, he knew that his son Joe wasn't going to because he's his injury problem, and Mixer and I kept in touch, and we shared a lot of golf days, but we met up whenever we could, and we discussed the opportunity of working together. And when he got offered the Dundee United job, he asked me to be his assistant. So I've left the academy side at Sheffield United to go on another journey, another challenge that you mentioned earlier on. But it's one I couldn't turn down. So I wasn't controlling my destiny at that point, but I was taking the opportunity that was handed to me and going to another level. So there is a lot of baggage with Dundee United at the time. Mixer being a legend there. And he was so committed and driven to make them successful. There was a lot of factors went against us, and unfortunately, they chose to, sack him, and I became caretaker manager for the third time, twice at Motherwell, once at Dundee United, and they were relegated, and a new regime came in there, and that's what led to the opportunity for me to go to America. But while that was happening, I said, I'd been out there for 18 months, but I was out there on my own. I was in California, Robbie was in South Carolina, my wife Yvonne and my daughter Jenna, they were back in Motherwell. My daughter, she was going on a journey to be a school teacher, and obviously my wife's keeping the family home going. So it wasn't like a career defining move to take the whole family, to America. So I was still keeping abreast of what was happening back home, and if any opportunities were arising, and I get a phone call from Craig Brown saying, Falkirk are looking for assistant manager. I'm going to put you forward. And it was Paul Hartley, was the manager of Falkirk. So we spoke, and again, going back to earlier experiences, when I was academy director at Motherwell, I used to give them loan players to Alloa. So you've got that
connection.
You've got the connection that although people tend to know each other in the game, especially in Scotland, then you've had that wee bit, well, he treated me right, or I did things that were associated with good standards. And I left a contract in America to come back to mainstream football in Scotland for like a third of the financial value. But it wasn't that wasn't the driver for me. The driver was to get back home, and then, as I say, get back in mainstream football. So I'm still operating in this assistant manager's role, but in these roles, I looked at the transition between young players to first team, and that's where I really get my buzz about being able to offer that assistance in their pathway. So the standards of the first team, I think, should be mirrored all the way down. So that your first team manager may change, but your standards should stay the same. So that lasted a year, and in between times, Mixer gets the Latvian national job. So the way national teams tend to work, you've got a full-time head coach, but you've got an assistant, a part-time assistant coach, and then all your staff that go with it. So again, it was an opportunity I couldn't turn down to go and work at international level. Is now another rung, and Falkirk were great that you could combine the both. So when the demise at Falkirk came, I was already working with the national team. I was working in the Euros. I was working in the Nations League. I was working with international players that were playing in countries all over the world. I was just enjoying a wonderful experience, but I was adding to my experience, and I was adding to my skill set. And then as a result, an opportunity came to manage. So being the head coach in my own right at a Premier League club in Latvia. And I was lucky that I went in because they had been struggling, but I managed to get the standards up, and I managed to be successful in terms of getting them qualification for the Europa League for the first time. So that was all happening at a pace that you weren't actually in control. You weren't sitting back and dining in your success. You were actually just striving to keep things going, and again, you're looking to raise the standards of players that are looking for you for leadership, and giving them methodology that's going to make them successful. So that was another year in Latvia that was just terrific. And when that came to an end, simultaneously the offer came to go to Cove Rangers, who'd just take advantage of the pyramid system, and qualified for the first time into the SPFL.
Yeah.
So we had that was reuniting myself with Paul again, and working in our relationship about developing that club. So for 3 years there, you have 2 promotions, win the title twice. It's just again testament to the players. And
the success that he's achieved at Cove Rangers is incredible. Just to sort of go through that, though, I mean, see, when you as you're talking, Gordon, and you're going through these steps, and obviously, the roles in some respects get more challenging. I mean, the differentiation between running a club team and running a national team are huge, and that's it's a huge step. You talk about obviously the Nations League, which I think serves a great purpose for so many countries, none more than obviously our own in Scotland.
Correct.
It's been a great help to Scotland. But, when you're when you look getting back, taking in and taking the 13s at Motherwell, when you look at all the steps you've taken, what a naturally progressive development. You've talked a lot about education, re-educating yourself, developing what the structures and systems you've put in place so that players know what's expected. It's not just the opinion of the manager and he doesn't favour me and he's got his wee favourites. Having all these systems in place all the way through, regardless of how your role changed, you continued to develop yourself within the role. I think that's massive, because in coaching is, you're in no time, and obviously having the opportunity I've read so far since we spoke from your book, you can see how you ensured that you adapted yourself to suit the role. Not for a second did you take for granted the success. There was no ego attached to it. You've continually developed yourself as the roles have opened up. And I think the fact that obviously when you look at Mixu Patalainen and you look at Paul Hartley, the reason they've called on you again, and I've seen comments for people like Craig Brown and how revered you've been in your roles, they're no accidents, and I don't want to say that as if blown sort of smoke. They're facts. The compliments that you've had there have been well earned, and you look at how dedicated you've been in coaching roles throughout your coaching career. And then obviously for yourself, I mean, that must have been terrific, you and Paul going and achieving that level of success with Cove.
It was, because it gave you, although we were a part-time club, we very much had the mantra that we would treat players as professionals and treat them like, full-time players. So the things that we incorporated into the week, like work load and schedule, was all the things that I did as the head coach with the Latvian national team and the Latvian Premier League team, and all the things that I'd saw being adapted at Motherwell, Sheffield United, Dundee United, all along the way. But it's this. I always think a lot it comes down to the standards that you show and the standards that you lead by, that these people can follow. So, just talking, briefly about the Cove situation, we calculated that we were probably only about an hour down than what you would do in a week as a full-time player or a full-time club. And that's because of the amount of work that you put in the small amount of time that you've got with players. Because if you're a full-time club, at Hartlepool there, when we moved to Hartlepool, because the robust nature of the English lower leagues, and I was down there with Sheffield United in League One and in Championship, but at League Two, you're playing Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, 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 Wednesday, bum, 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 bum. So therefore, you need to get a lot of work in at the pre-season to make sure you've got your one, you've got your players in place. You can work on their fitness regime, and then you're really looking at playing, recovering, preparing, playing, recovery, and it goes in that cycle. And you can imagine the players at Rangers and Celtic and big clubs who've got international players. So it's not as if every day, and the fans' outlook sometimes is, why are they not working every day? There's only so much you can put in. Now you can certainly do a lot of technical stuff, you can do a lot of video stuff, but really from game to game, the majority of clubs in a season, because of the amount of because of the schedule, are really playing and preparing and planning.
And what sort of size of squad would you have had at Cove at that time, Gordon, sort of numbers wise?
We didn't work with a big squad, and we inherited some terrific players that had been so successful in the Highland League. There's players playing with Cove Rangers right now on Saturday against Partick Thistle, and 40% of them will have played in the Highland League 3 years ago. So the good thing about that is you were working with winners, and you were working with people that were used to winning. But what you were giving them was a different way to play now. So you're winning. One of the things that are really adopted in all of these places that I've coached is you've got to win hearts and minds first. You can't go in there with, I'm Johnny Big Time, here's what I did, this is going, no, people just switch off. That's human nature. And you also, I don't believe that one size fits all. So you've got to customise to what you're working with. But because we had a professional setup at Cove, and we had a professional approach, and we had professional players, we were successful.
And I think that's that element of trust. You know, I think you're absolutely right that as trust's built, then the players will believe in whatever the message and the systems you're trying to portray and implement. But that trust has got to come first before you try and get them to move the system. And once you create that culture, then it's easier when players are coming in to fit with that culture. And you can see that obviously the professionalism that you put into Cove was a large part of that success.
Well, you know the old adage, build it and they will come. Show them that, one, here's the type of people we are, here's the work that we put in. So when players came to training or games, they knew there was organisation, they knew there was discipline, they knew there was a methodology. It was never a turn up and play. I didn't ever I'm not there to entertain players. And I'm not there to train them. You train dogs. You're there to make them better. So I even used the terminology that practice was Monday, Tuesday, Thursday night, if it were. It wasn't training, because people have got the idea of training as boot camp or sit, heel, lie down. I think you've got to, and again, because where I think we were so successful was we spent so much time working on the patterns of play and the style of play. Rather than worrying about people's fitness. If you weren't fit, and we had a fantastic fitness coach, Tam Ritchie, who would extracurricular work with your players. So then the nights that you came, you were there to practice, and you were there to understand how the opposition was going to line up, and you were going to understand how we were going to play. So there wasn't anything left, it wasn't a stone left unturned.
That terminology is vital. It's funny because I've spoken to a few Scandinavian players and players that I knew for the time in Scotland, and that's what they would call training, practice. And I think that's a great point, Gordon, because it is practice. And, again, maybe more so for your era, but when you think of training, I used to visualize training. It was, running around the park and, doggies and doing, it was all running exercises.
But you also, while you were running there, coaches were setting exercises up. I think where I've evolved as a coach and the people I've worked with, when you come in as a player, you're moving from there to there to there to there. And even things like putting up in the dressing room, either on a TV or on a whiteboard, what they're going to do that night. It prepares you. Because this is what you're going to work on. This is the length of time you're going to do it. And after that, you're going to move towards that. And then you're going to move towards that. And the periodization of the week then evolves up until game day. Therefore, see on game day, You don't need to say too much.
Aye. The work's done.
The work's done. You just need to say, see what we did all week. That's what you need to do there.
The structure's so vital in it, and you know, obviously the success that you've enjoyed through so many different aspects of your career, but you can see that in the way that, you know, you're talking and how thorough you are to detail about all the jobs that you know, the different steps you've taken in your own career, how thorough you are about your own preparation, and that can only come through in how you've worked with players.
But if you then assess yourself, you can then be in a position to get your players to self-assess.
Yeah.
Therefore, when you're assessing them,
Right.
they get where you're coming from. If you just go in with a blame culture, or you never think, you know, you're Teflon, then players smell that. You know, that's it's back down to the environment you create. I believe, you know, a team's an expression of the coach's personality.
Yeah.
I think that's why Guardiola's teams play the way they play. Arteta's team play the way they play. And in certain other teams, you can say, well, I can see why they're quite mundane and quite pedantic. Look at their coach. And I've seen it in country to country and culture to culture. So if, I would say to players the way I've did, you've got a rucksack wherever you go. Don't get it loaded down with stuff that's no use to you. Put in your rucksack things that's transferable, things that are going to help you, and keep it as light as possible. There's no point in just getting bogged down with every single thing. You know, it's just disseminating what you know, the wheat for the chaff.
And that basis, obviously, he's had the success you had at Cove Rangers, and then the opportunity again to go south. Am I right in saying that was the next move?
I just felt I thought we'd achieved as much as we could have achieved at the time. You know, the board were terrific, and they had a kind of self-admission that we'd got there a bit quicker than we expected. So the objective, and this is important, I think, to give players objectives, but as a staff, we had a 5-year plan to get the championship, and we got there in 3 years. And quite honestly, we'd have got there in 2 years, bar the pandemic.
Yeah.
So there was the evolution of the club was again the pandemic put paid to structural development, infrastructural development, and also the squad doing as well as it had. Eventually, that'll need overhauled, and geographical and logistical complications come in with teams like Cove Rangers. That's why, you know, your Ross Counties and Inverness's, it's a challenge. So unless you're at the next level, that you're maybe looking at accommodation and you're looking at residential facilities, I think we're a victim of our own success. But the opportunity to go to England, I felt was the right decision. It's difficult to speak about it because the way football's gone just now, I feel, you know, too many decisions are taken too quickly. Internally in clubs, the reason you're there is because there's dysfunctional practices at the clubs. You know, the only club that I've ever gone into where it was things were on an even keel was Cove Rangers. The difference was you were coming into a new league. You know, the first game of the season we won 5-0 against Edinburgh City, who were the favourites, and another club who underline the dynamics or the demographics of how Scottish clubs have changed. But the Hartlepool, I don't regret it. You know, there's a lot of things that I could say, but that I wouldn't say. But from a personal perspective, I would tell players the way I'd told every other player. Appreciate every single day at training. And what we did every single day at training was everything that I did at Cove, and everything I did at Dundee United, and everything I did at Motherwell and Sheffield United and in America. Sometimes maybe just you know, the fate's no with you for certain things.
I think you're absolutely right, Gordon. You know, and I know obviously it's a very recent sort of experience for yourself and Paul, but you know, if you look at football today, as you just touched on a few minutes ago, it's fair to say Sir Alex Ferguson would not have got the time that allowed him to achieve 2 decades of success for Manchester United. And what a loss that would have been for everybody at that club, fans, supporters, fans, players. you know, the infrastructure of how the clubs became. You had Cristiano Ronaldo recently saying it's no changed since he left, which obviously is not for us, for me to say. But had he not been allowed the time to develop what he did at Manchester United, it might never have happened.
I totally agree with you. And if you go back, because we can relate to the generationally, you know, the Lee Sharp's replay goal in the FA Cup final gives him a stay execution. That's a fact. And working with Archie Knox, which I did, he would tell me how, you know, Sir Alex would go in and he completely ripped up the youth system. He completely ripped up. I mean, they didn't have. They went to the, you know, the old First Division, as it were, before the Premier League, and they were third bottom of the league. He says, and there was a drinking culture there. But that's a story that's not for me to tell.
No, but I agree. I think you're right.
You know what he had to do, and you know that goalie Lee Sharp's. I wrote a bit for you know the press a couple of weeks ago, and I wasn't defending myself, because at the end of the day, it's up for other people to make judgment on how I was as a person, how I performed my roles, and how I treated people. That's what I can be judged on. But if you sacked all the managers in Scotland on any given year, if Celtic are predominant the way they've been in the last few years and they win the treble, there's no other cups for any other team in Scotland to win other than the European positions. So sack all the coaches. So in the First Division, the Championship, the First Division and the Second Division, there's only the 3 titles and there's a Challenge Cup. So Cove Rangers win the Championship and the Challenge Cup, sack every other manager, except the ones that won the First Division and the Second Division. That's how we think. That, you know, they don't look at, did you reduce the average age of the squad? Did you increase the player value? Did you grow the fan base? You know, did you relinquish a bit of your budget because you wanted extra facilities for the training? There's so many things that don't, you know, and for to say it's a results-driven business, it's only a results-driven business if you don't believe in performance.
And I think that infrastructure that you're talking about, you know, when you look at, as we take the grandest example being Sir Alex Ferguson, you imagine at any club, and you've done it, you've been there throughout all those roles. When you're trying to sort of, you're in a limelight position at the club, you know, when you went in at Motherwell and, you know, the very early stages of coaching at a professional club, you're given time to develop the academy because nobody's necessarily looking at you. When you're in an assistant manager's job or a manager's job and you decide to go back and change that structure, whilst focusing on that results-driven job that you're doing, that's not easy because you're being measured for the results week in, week out. Whereas when you're only running the academy, nobody's seeing that really other than the club themselves. And that's a really difficult balance, I would imagine, Gordon.
It is, but one of the key components there that links all of that, I think, is communication. I think the fact that if it's Sir Alex Ferguson and Manchester United come out and say, or say Rangers just now, they've just changed their manager, and they tell the people, this is what we're expecting. I don't think there's enough clarity or enough communication to tell people what they're expecting. There's so many guys that want to take a job, and you know, if a club's in disarray and the manager's job comes up for grabs, people will apply for it without doing the due diligence, and that may have been our downfall at Hartlepool. We maybe didn't do enough due diligence. We took people at face value, but the point I'm trying to make is it should be at day one. There should be KPIs, key performance indicators, what's expected of you, and rather than having to win every single week. Now, I understand I've never been there as a player, but having gone into the Old Firm and playing against them, I know there's a level of expectation there, and it just can't be accepted that if you don't win. But do you know what? It's so difficult to abandon the things that you want to do just at the expense of trying to win a game. If I'm trying to win every single game, and I'm not maybe giving a young player the opportunity, or going back to a way at the start of our conversation about relative age effect, that wee guy that's a wee bit under physical strength is not going to get a chance because I need to play this bruiser to make sure
they're too high.
Aye. And if you then think as an academy director that you can't see the bigger picture about the long-term player development, then you shouldn't be in that role, because you're only looking at that win on the Saturday or the Sunday just to appease parents who might want to go in chats and forums to champion that they're beating somebody or criticise that they've not beaten somebody. And that's where communication is key.
But that, do you know what, Gordon? That's as you were saying all that, it's just set a real kind of alarm bell thinking off my head. When you think of how the academies are now, modern day academies are perceived, where development is more important than results, and yet you imagine trying to educate a young player and all those thought processes, and then all of a sudden they get to the first team, and that train of thought is no longer applicable because
Well,
it's become results driven,
You're sitting beside that guy in the dressing room that's needing that win bonus because his wife might have a holiday planned, or there might be some extension to the house. But I've said to you as an under 17 player, and this is where I really enjoyed my role as that intermediate, to prepare these kids mentally. That in their growth, they came up in their early part that results weren't important. They also were brought up that every day equal game time. Suddenly they're sitting in a dog-eat-dog environment. If they don't, and that might affect the performance because you don't have the confidence. You've certainly not got the maturity to do things, or not many have, from day one. So that goes back down to what's the expectation of the club? What's the culture of the club?
And is that something, Gordon, in your roles, and certainly now, obviously, where I would imagine, because I'm going to ask you the question, what comes next for you yourself? What comes next in the career of Gordon Young? But, is that something you really try and work on, that mental strength aspect to preparing a young player for when the first team opportunity comes knocking at their door? You try and prepare them for what that expectation level is going to be.
I think that's your responsibility. I think you don't join the club if you've not got a modicum of ability, and you don't join it if you've not got the perceived potential. But at the same time, the psychological element of the player development is huge. I'm caught between in the four pillars. You've got technical, tactical, psychological, and physical. I'm still of the opinion you need to be a good player, and then you need to have the mental strength or the mental toughness. I don't buy into this. Players should be brave on the ball. See, Brave's battling cancer. Brave's a Ukrainian soldier. We're talking about football. You've got to be strong. You've got to have a fixed mindset, and that's coachable. That's coachable in that environment. So if you're preparing these kids, I was involved, or I kind of discovered philosophies where induced trauma in young players was helpful. And I believe in that. I believe that they shouldn't, it's a shock that they get dropped on the Saturday or the Sunday. How do they deal with it? And that then opens up another wee bit. Is it the parent that's more embarrassed that he's not playing than the player? How does the player deal with that? If he's had an injury setback, how does he go over? How does he overcome that? When you're released, and speaking for experience, you need to overcome that. But you need to have the tools to overcome that. And that's where it's a huge responsibility on clubs to develop players psychologically and to be, as I say, tough enough to cope with the demands that's going to be put on them.
Brilliant. That's great. And so just sort of, I mean, that absolutely sums up the whole ethos of what these interviews for me collectively are specifically about, Gordon. I mean, I'm really grateful for what you've just said, because that sums it up in its entirety. But why I'm doing this and why I'm hoping to get this out to so many young players to watch, so that people with a level of experience such as yourself can sort of get them to ask those questions of themselves, young players to say, I never thought of that. And and even at times when maybe they are being dropped, whilst they're going through their development stages, they can understand the manager's thinking behind it and make the manager's job a wee bit easier, or the coach's job or the academy director's job a wee bit easier, and maybe having a bit more understanding why that's happening. And for you yourself, Gordon, what comes next? What's your hopes now as you're ready to take the next step back into football?
Well, sometimes it's a wee bit precarious because you're not really in control of that. Whereas maybe other industries, you would be in a position to put yourself in the shop window or somebody's eye line that's looking to bring a skill set to a business. But for me personally, I've had 20 years coaching all over the world. I've coached under 11s and I've coached international players. It's harder to coach under 11s than it is international players. But with having that experience, I'm caught betwixt and between. The biggest thing for me would be the project.
Yeah.
I don't want to go into something that's the most short-term thing I've ever been involved in, and I don't regret it.
Yeah.
If I was doing things differently, I know what I would do differently. But a project to me is far more important than a financial remuneration. I think it's important, and I don't know where that would be. But having been assistant manager, a manager, academy director, first team coach, I feel my skill set is so adaptable only because of the places I've been and the people I've worked with that I'm ready to embrace if somebody thought, you know what, he's the kind of guy that would make a difference to a player and to a club.
Yeah.
I think I could go in with that wholeheartedly, and that's the opportunity I'm looking for.
Brilliant. And very finally, if you were passing on advice or you'd anything to say to a young player or a young coach, what would that be, Gordon?
Enjoy every day. What else would you rather be doing?
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Gordon, honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure to interview you, and I'm really grateful for your time. It's just so much of what you've said encompasses, as I've just said there, the message that I want to try and see carried through to young players to really create an awareness in their mind of what it is, what all the different challenges and obstacles and bumps in the road that are going to come as part of their journey.
And
so
that is key critical. Is if there's a slide I use to finish, and it's about your journey, and there's a point of entry here, and there's a destination here, and in one slide there's a straight line. It's never going to be like that. The truth is, it's going to be filled with potholes. It's going to be filled with massive caves. It's going to be have peaks, and it's going to be like that all your way through. And it's you having the ability to, like I say, enjoy the journey, but also be able to navigate your way through the tough times because it's worth it at the end.
Yeah, brilliant. Gordon, you've I'm going to put a link in the bio, but you mentioned earlier that during COVID you wrote a book. Do you just want to give us a wee insight into what that was about?
It was using my time that in the pandemic or in the lockdown to keep me mentally stimulated. I'd have my day consisted of physical stimulation in the morning, we walking, jogging, that kind of thing to try and keep you functional, but also the mental side of it. I had a co-author who's a journalist called Stuart Hall, had been at me for a few years, and he basically wanted me to write a book based on my experiences. And it was the only reason I agreed to do it, because I didn't want to tell the story of a player. I didn't want to tell the story. I wanted to tell a story about 20 years coaching in 5 different continents. And it was my memoirs. And the reflection on it made me think that everybody's got a book in them. I think everybody's got a story. And once you actually sit down, it's great for the things that people with mental health and dementia, that they actually, it's the bringing alive the stories, the experiences they've had and the memories they've had. And we've all got so many great memories. If you start off in life at school with your busy book, you're writing what you did at the weekend, or you did what you did on a holiday. So what I had the opportunity to do was to put my memoirs down in a book, Gordon Young, Licensed to Skill, and I had a hoot writing it. And my co-author was absolutely fantastic. but it was only down to circumstances. It was never down to tell about a 38th minute winner or a header or somebody did this. It was about showing people that a wee guy from Muirhouse could have a 20-year career as a global football coach and remember the good times.
Do you know what? I mean, obviously, as I said to you, living in Spain is the delivery I was on, because the book, as I said, I'll put the link in the bio, is available on Amazon. The delivery here is a 5-week delivery for me to get the book. So I went on and got what I could to actually read as much as I could before we did this interview.
Send me cancel it and send me your address and I'll post it out to you.
Thank you. But the amount of my old haunts that you brought up, Village Fog, some of the there's actually aspects at places that I played, having lived in Motherwell myself for a big chunk of my younger life, and it was brilliant, Gordon. I mean, the natural way in which you tell the story is what makes it so appealing, because anybody that's got any interest in football at all will resonate with so many things, and in the manner by which you describe them, it was first class. So well done in that. Fantastic.
And I've thoroughly enjoyed this as well, Tom.
But great. Listen, it's some of the points.
It's actually causing me a dilemma now, because see, that question is what people would say, what are you going to do? And I go, it's not my call right now.
Aye.
And you're hoping for, I'm equally as comfortable doing the manager's role as the academy director's role, and all the ones in between. I love the assistant's role. I really love that, because I get the opportunity to get more involved with the players.
Thanks for watching the latest episode of Making It Pro. Remember to like, subscribe and leave a comment below. Look forward to sharing the next episode soon.